Okay, let's unpack this. When you think of Jonathan Swift, what is the very first image that pops into your head?
Oh, that's easy.
If you're like 99% of the population, I'm willing to bet it's a giant man tied down by hundreds of tiny little ropes surrounded by miniature people.
That is the enduring image. Gulliver's Travels. It's likely the only thing most people know about him.
Right.
They see it as a whimsical children's story. Maybe they've seen the Jack Black movie or a cartoon adaptation. It's just ingrained in the culture as a kind of fairy tale.
Exactly. But here is where it gets really interesting and frankly a little dark. The man who wrote that story wasn't some kindly old grandfather figure spinning yarns by the fireplace.
Not even close.
He was a political power broker who could topple governments with a single pamphlet. He was a clergyman who was accused of being a madman. And he was arguably the greatest troll, if I can use that modern term, in the history of the English language.
Troll is actually a surprisingly accurate description, though he did it with a quill pen rather than a keyboard. He mastered the art of the hoax long before the internet even existed.
He really did.
But to view him just as a prankster, that misses the point. He was a man fueled by what he himself called fierce indignation.
And that's the phrase we need to hold on to, fierce indignation. So today we have a massive stack of sources biographies, a lot of literary analysis of his major works like A Tale of a Tub in Drapier's Letters, and historical records from 17th and 18th century Britain and Ireland.
A really rich trove of material.
And our mission for this deep dive is pretty clear. We're going to move way past the children's book version of Jonathan Swift. We're going to look at that indignation you mentioned, his bizarre and frankly tragic personal life, and how he managed to convince the entire British public that a famous man was dead when he was actually walking around screaming, "I'm alive."
And that indignation is the absolute key. To understand Swift, you have to understand that he wasn't writing to entertain, he was writing to punish.
To punish, that's a strong word.
It is. He saw the world as broken, corrupt, and just ridiculous, and he used satire as a weapon to expose it. But to get there, we have to look at where he came from, because his origin story is chaotic right from the very first page.
Chaotic is an understatement. The timeline here is just baffling. So let's dive into it. Jonathan Swift is born in Dublin, November 30th, 1667, but the tragedy starts before he even takes his first breath.
Yes. His father, also named Jonathan Swift, died about 7 months before the younger Jonathan was born. So he arrives in the world already defined by absence.
And the cause of his father's death, sources are pretty specific. It's noted as syphilis.
That's right. Which is heavy enough, but there's a detail that his father claimed about how he contracted it.
I saw that. He said he got it from dirty sheets while he was out of town.
Which, medically speaking, is highly dubious. Syphilis doesn't really work that way. But whether it was true or a convenient lie to cover up infidelity, it paints a picture of the shame and the shadow hanging over the family. So Swift is born fatherless. His mother, Abigail, is left with very little money. She is, for all intents and purposes, destitute.
And then, at age 1, something incredibly strange happens.
The baby Jonathan Swift is kidnapped.
This blew my mind when I read the biography. He's 1 year old, and his wet nurse, the woman hired to breastfeed him, just takes him. She abducts him and takes him to Whitehaven in England.
And this wasn't a ransom situation. It wasn't a crime for profit. The sources suggest she became incredibly attached to him.
She just loved him that much.
Apparently, she took him across the Irish Sea to England. And here is the kicker. He stayed there for 3 years.
That is what I want to stick on for a second. 3 years. Where was the mother? I mean, was this a kidnapping or was it a relief for her?
The records are murky, but the consensus is that his mother, Abigail, essentially let it happen. She had no money. She was a widow. Maybe she thought he'd have a better life. Who knows?
But think about the psychology of that child. His first memories, his formative language years, are spent with a woman who isn't his mother, in a country that isn't his home.
It creates a fracture in his identity right from the start, a profound one.
And clearly this nurse was intense. The sources say by age 3, he could read the Bible. So he's this toddler prodigy living a stolen life.
Exactly. Is he Irish? Is he English? He's literally displaced. And when he finally gets sent back to Ireland at age 4, his mother leaves again to go back to England.
So he's abandoned a second time.
He's passed off to his uncle Godwin Swift.
Godwin Swift. So this is the rich uncle trope coming to the rescue.
More like the rich but distant uncle. He provided the education but not the love. He sent Jonathan to Kilkenny College, which is like the Eton of Ireland, and then to Trinity College Dublin.
Okay, so a top-tier education.
The best money could buy. But here's a detail most biographies skip. Swift wasn't just some random orphan. He had ink in his blood.
Right, the family tree in the notes is wild.
It really is. His grandmother was the niece of Sir Erasmus Dryden. That's the grandfather of the poet John Dryden, who was the literary giant of that age.
Wow.
And on the other side, his uncle married the daughter of Sir William Davenant.
And Davenant was the godson of William Shakespeare.
Correct. So Swift is practically literary royalty by blood, even if he's broke. You'd think with that pedigree he'd crush it at university.
You would think. But the records show he was a bit of a rebel, or perhaps just bored.
Yeah.
He absolutely loathed the curriculum.
Because the curriculum was Aristotelian logic. We have to define that to understand Swift's later writing. At the time, university wasn't about critical thinking or scientific discovery in the way we think of it now.
Not at all.
It was about memorizing rigid categories and syllogisms established by Aristotle 2,000 years prior. It was very dry, very formulaic.
So all men are mortal. Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. That kind of thing.
Exactly. But imagine doing that for hours a day, for years. Swift called it verbal smog. He wanted to read history, poetry, politics. He rebelled against the rote memorization.
And how did he do grade-wise?
He actually received his Bachelor of Arts degree by special grace.
By special grace. That sounds like a polite way of saying, we're letting you pass, but you didn't really earn it.
That is exactly what it means. It indicates he was an above-average student, but certainly not exceptional in the eyes of the university. He was likely reading what he wanted to read rather than what was assigned.
But that hatred of bad logic, of lazy thinking.
That becomes his superpower later. Gulliver's Travels is basically him taking a flamethrower to the entire university curriculum.
So he leaves the temple of learning, pun intended, and heads to London. He leaves Ireland in 1688 because of the Glorious Revolution political turmoil, as usual, and lands a job as secretary to Sir William Temple.
And this is the Karate Kid training montage of his life. Temple is the crucible where Swift learns statecraft. Sir William Temple was a retired diplomat, a huge deal in English politics. And Swift wasn't just filing papers. Over time, he gained Temple's trust.
He was in the room where it happens, so to speak.
He really was. He was in the room where decisions were made. He was even sent to meet King William III to discuss things like triennial parliaments.
So he goes from being a special grace student to chatting with the King of England about parliamentary terms. That's a heck of a job.
Precisely. This is where Swift sees the machinery of power up close. He realizes that the people running the country aren't these godlike figures. They're just people, often flawed and petty.
And while he's there, something else happens that sticks with him forever. His health.
Yes, he starts getting these attacks, dizziness, vertigo, deafness.
Ménière's disease.
They didn't have a name for it back then, but the symptoms fit perfectly. It's an inner ear disorder. Imagine trying to navigate high society London, trying to be witty and sharp while suddenly the room spins and you can't hear what anyone is saying.
That sounds terrifying.
It plagued him his entire life and contributed to his fear of losing his mind.
So we have a brilliant, sickly, ambitious young man who has seen the inside of power. And he decides to use his writing not just for art, but as a weapon. This brings us to what I think is the funniest section of our sources, the Bickerstaff hoax.
Oh, this is a masterclass. It's important to set the scene. It's 1708.
And the target is a man named John Partridge.
John Partridge was a cobbler, a shoemaker, who reinvented himself as an astrologer.
Of course.
He published an almanac every year predicting the deaths of famous people, usually church officials or politicians. Swift found this absolutely ridiculous. He hated the superstition, and he hated the arrogance of it.
So Swift decides to beat him at his own game. He doesn't just write an article saying astrology is fake.
Yeah.
No, that's too simple.
Far too simple. He invents a character, a fake astrologer named Isaac Bickerstaff.
Bickerstaff, great name.
Isn't it? Swift publishes a pamphlet called Predictions for the Ensuing Year under the name Isaac Bickerstaff. He writes it with this very serious, solemn tone. He criticizes other astrologers for being vague. He says, I'm going to be precise.
Okay, I like where this is going.
And his first precise prediction is that John Partridge will die on March 29th at about 11:00 at night of a raging fever.
He gives the exact date and time. That is bold. So March 29th comes and goes. What does Swift do?
This is the genius part. On March 30th, Swift publishes another pamphlet anonymously. This one is a letter to a lord claiming to be from someone who was at Partridge's bedside.
No.
Yes. It details, in sad, somber language, how Partridge passed away exactly as predicted. It even says Partridge confessed on his deathbed that Bickerstaff was a better astrologer.
I love the commitment to the bit. It's incredible. So the public reads this, and they believe it.
They completely believe it. Hook, line, and sinker. In fact, the Stationers' Company, which handled copyright and publishing registers, struck John Partridge's name from their rolls because he was deceased.
And meanwhile, the real John Partridge is walking around London.
He is screaming from the rooftops, "I am not dead." He publishes his own almanac saying, "I am alive." But nobody listens. It's amazing.
So what does Swift do then?
Swift, still posing as Bickerstaff, publishes a reply saying, obviously he's dead. This man claiming to be Partridge is an imposter. Besides, look at his writing. It's so bad, no living man could have written it.
That is brutal. It's gaslighting on a national scale.
It destroyed Partridge's reputation. He eventually stopped publishing. But for Swift, this established his style. Deadpan, committed, using a persona to expose absurdity. It paved the way for everything that followed.
So he's a celebrity in the literary world. But Swift wanted real political power. She wanted to be a player. And for a while, he was.
He really was.
But the sources show he was a bit of a political shapeshifter. He started as a Whig and ended up a Tory. And I want to dig into this because it's not just about flipping. It tells us a lot about his values.
It does. It wasn't about liberal versus conservative in the modern sense. It was about the church. Swift was a clergyman, first and foremost.
Right.
The Whigs were the party of the Glorious Revolution, which he supported, but they were allied with dissenters Protestants outside the Anglican Church. Swift viewed the Anglican Church as the glue holding society together. If you undermine the church, you get chaos.
And then there's the money. We have to talk about the First Fruits and 20th. It sounds like a bad indie band, but it was a big deal.
It was a tax. Basically, Irish clergymen had to pay their first year's income to the crown. Swift was sent to London to lobby the government to get this tax repealed.
And he goes to the Whigs first, his allies.
He does. And they stonewall him. They treat him like a nuisance. They just didn't care about the financial struggles of the Irish clergy.
So he feels betrayed.
Deeply. But the Tories. The Tories see a weapon walking through the door. Robert Harley, the master manipulator of the Tory party, welcomes Swift with open arms. He says, "We love the church. We'll cut the tax. Join us."
So was he a mercenary? Because that's how it looks on the surface. He didn't get what he wanted, so he switched sides.
It's the debate that has raged for 300 years. His enemies called him a turncoat rat. Swift argued he was the only consistent one. He stayed loyal to the church, while the Whigs had betrayed it.
Okay, that makes sense.
But once he switched, oh man, he became the Tory attack dog. He takes over the Examiner, which was the main Tory paper, and just starts shredding the opposition. He was basically the press secretary and chief propagandist for the government.
He's in the inner circle. He's sitting in the room with the Prime Minister and the Secretary of State, mediating their fights. He thinks he's made it.
He's at the absolute pinnacle of power.
But he forgot one person.
The most important person, Queen Anne.
There's a classic case of Twitter fingers ruining a career, 18th century style. He wrote something he really, really shouldn't have.
He wrote the Windsor Prophecy. It was a savage attack on the Duchess of Somerset.
The carrots thing.
Yes, he made fun of her red hair, calling her carrots. But worse, much worse, he insinuated she was a murderer. She had been accused of involvement in her previous husband's death and warned the Queen she wasn't safe around her.
And the Duchess of Somerset happened to be the Queen's best friend.
And the groom of the stole, the lady who helps her get dressed, the most intimate position in the court.
So Swift is in the back rooms feeling like a god. But in the royal bedroom, the Duchess is showing the Queen these vicious poems.
Exactly. So when the Tories try to make Swift a bishop, which was the plan all along, the Queen just says no.
Anyone but him.
She blocked every single promotion. The most powerful writer in England couldn't get a job because he couldn't resist a good roast. It's kind of incredible.
So when the Queen dies in 1714 and the Tories fall from power, Swift is left completely exposed.
The Whigs come roaring back into power. The Tory leaders are accused of treason. Swift's political career is effectively over. He had no protection. His friends were being arrested or fleeing to France.
And what happens to him?
Swift had only one option left: the position of Dean of St. Patrick's Cathedral in Dublin. It was the best his friends could secure for him before the government fell.
And he didn't view this as a homecoming, did he?
Not at all. He described it as going to live like a rat in a hole. To him, Dublin was a backwater. He felt exiled from the culture and power of London. He was bitter.
But this is the irony of Swift's life. He hated being sent back to Ireland, yet he becomes one of the greatest Irish patriots in history. How does a guy who feels like a rat in a hole become a national hero?
It was his indignation again. He might have resented Ireland, but he resented injustice even more. And he saw how England was exploiting Ireland economically. This leads us to the Drapier's letters in 1724.
This story is fascinating. It's about copper coins. Tell us about Wood's halfpence.
The English government granted a patent to a man named William Wood to mint copper coinage for Ireland. On paper, maybe not a terrible idea.
But it was a corrupt deal.
Completely. Wood was going to flood Ireland with substandard coins to make a massive profit for himself and, allegedly, the king's mistress. It would have debased the Irish currency and ruined the economy.
So Swift puts on a mask again. He becomes M.B. Drapier.
A humble shopkeeper, a draper, and he writes a series of pamphlets explaining in simple, clear language exactly why this is a scam. He rallies the Irish people, rich and poor, Protestant and Catholic, to boycott these coins.
He unites everyone.
He writes, "Money, the lifeblood of the nation, is about to be drawn off." He makes it a matter of national survival.
And the government was furious. They put a bounty on the author's head, right?
They offered a reward of £300 for the identity of the Drapier. But here's the amazing thing. Everyone in Dublin knew it was Swift. Everyone. From the Lord Mayor down to the street sweeper.
And nobody snitched.
Not a single person turned him in. He was their hero.
There's a visual in the notes that I love. When Swift returned from a trip to England during this time, there was a banner hanging in Dublin that said, "Welcome home, Drapier."
He had won. The coins were withdrawn. He had defeated the British government with a pen. It proved that public opinion, mobilized by a brilliant writer, could stop a tyranny.
We have to shift gears now to his personal life, which is, well, complicated. It doesn't even begin to cover it. We have two women, Stella and Vanessa.
Yes. These are the two great loves of his life, though the nature of that love is the subject of centuries of debate.
Let's start with Stella. Her real name was Esther Johnson.
Swift met her at Moore Park back when he was working for Temple. She was only 8 years old. He was in his 20s. He was her tutor.
A huge age gap.
A huge age gap. But as she grew up, they formed an incredibly deep bond. She and her companion moved to Ireland to be near him. They wrote constantly, but they never lived in the same house. They were always chaperoned.
The rumor, though, and his friend Thomas Sheridan believed this, was that they were secretly married in 1716.
It is a persistent rumor, but his housekeepers denied it. What we do know is that Swift was fiercely possessive. When another man, William Tisdall, wanted to propose to Stella, Swift wrote him a letter that was on the surface polite, but essentially marked his territory. He called Tisdall an interloper in private.
So he didn't want anyone else to have her?
No, but he wouldn't or couldn't publicly claim her himself. It's a mystery.
And then there's Vanessa, Esther Vanhomrigh. He really liked the name Esther, apparently.
He did. He met her in London. She was much younger, wealthy, and head over heels in love with him. He created the name Vanessa for her Van, from her last name, Essa, from Esther.
She seems much more intense than Stella. She followed him to Ireland, didn't she?
She did, which was a nightmare for Swift. He tried to keep his two lives separate. Vanessa was demanding. She wanted marriage. She wanted him to commit.
And it all came to a head.
There is a story, maybe apocryphal, that she wrote to Stella directly, asking, "Are you married to him?" Swift found out, rode to Vanessa's house in a rage, threw the letter on her table with a terrifying look on his face, and stormed out without a single word.
And she died shortly after that confrontation.
She died in 1723, aged 35. She had destroyed a will that left her fortune to Swift. It was a tragic, ugly end.
Now, there is a theory in our source material that might explain why Swift never publicly married Stella, and why his relationships were so weirdly distant yet intense. It's the Alternative View by Dennis Johnston.
This is a bombshell, if true.
It really is.
It is a controversial theory, but it fits the puzzle pieces. Johnston suggests that Swift's father wasn't actually the man who died of syphilis. He suggests Swift's real father was Sir John Temple, the father of his boss, Sir William Temple.
Okay, and there's also a theory that Stella was Sir William Temple's illegitimate daughter.
Exactly. So if both those things are true, then Swift was Sir William Temple's half-brother, and Stella was Sir William Temple's daughter.
Which would make Swift and Stella
Uncle and niece?
Whoa. That puts a whole new spin on the secrecy. A very dark spin.
If that were true, it explains everything. They loved each other deeply, but marriage would have been incestuous, forbidden by church law. It would explain the secrecy, the lack of children, the lifelong companionship without a public union.
We can't prove it.
We can't, but it adds a layer of Greek tragedy to his life that feels plausible, given the circumstances.
And when Stella died in 1728, Swift was wrecked.
He couldn't even attend her funeral. He was so overcome with grief. He sat in his room at the deanery, writing about her as the lights of the cathedral flickered through his window. Years later, after Swift himself died, they found a small packet in his desk. Inside was a lock of hair.
And the paper it was wrapped in was labeled.
Only a woman's hair. It's such a simple, devastating phrase. So much pain and love packed into 4 words. It hints at a grief he couldn't even articulate.
Let's pivot back to the work. Because amidst all this personal drama and political fighting, he writes his 2 absolute masterpieces. First, Gulliver's Travels in 1726. We mentioned the giant, but let's look at the satire. The sources mention a specific scene, the palace fire in Lilliput.
Yes, this is pure Swift. The tiny empress's palace catches fire. Gulliver, the giant, rushes to help, but he has no water, so he urinates on the palace to put the fire out.
And it works, right? He saves the day.
It works perfectly. The fire's out, but the empress is disgusted, and he's impeached for treason for, defiling the royal palace.
That's hilarious, but it's a metaphor for something real.
It's a metaphor for the Treaty of Utrecht. The Tories had ended a long, bloody war, put out the fire, but they did it through illegal, secret negotiations, urinating on the palace. They got the job done, but in a disgraceful manner.
That is such a specific, dirty metaphor for high politics.
That is Swift. He juxtaposes the high and the low. He forces you to look at the ugliness of human behavior. Gulliver's Travels isn't an adventure story, it's a mirror.
What do you mean by that?
The Lilliputians are petty and warlike. The giants of Brobdingnag are gross and physical. The Houyhnhnms, the talking horses, are perfectly rational, but cold and unfeeling. Swift is asking, what is a human? Are we rational animals? No, he says, we are only animals capable of reason, but we rarely use it.
And then 3 years later, in 1729, he drops the mic with a modest proposal. Even if you've never read Swift, you know the punchline. Eat the babies.
It is the nuclear option of satire. Ireland was in a famine. The poor were starving. The English landlords were squeezing every penny out of them. Swift had written serious, logical proposals for years, buy Irish goods, tax the absentees, and nobody listened. So he wrote this.
The full title is A Modest Proposal for Preventing the Children of Poor People in Ireland being a burden on their parents or country and for making them beneficial to the public.
But the brilliance isn't just the shock value, it's the voice. Swift doesn't write this as a raving madman. He writes it as a helpful, slightly bored bureaucrat, a project manager.
It's the voice of an economist. He crunches the numbers. He says, I have the quote here, a young, healthy child, well nursed, is at a year old a most delicious, nourishing, and wholesome food, whether stewed, roasted, baked, or boiled.
It makes your skin crawl.
It's horrifying. He even suggests recipes.
And I make no doubt that it will equally serve in a fricassee or a ragout. It's stomach-churning. But why? He's mirroring the attitude of the English landlords. They were already devouring the Irish people, economically taking their land, their crops, their dignity. Swift just made it literal.
There's a specific section in the text that I think is the key to the whole thing. It's where he lists the other expedients.
Yes. This is the mask-slipping moment. After proposing cannibalism for pages, the narrator says, therefore let no man talk to me of other expedients, of taxing our absentees, of using neither clothes nor household furniture except what is of our own growth and manufacture.
Wait, those are real sensible solutions.
Exactly. Those are the actual political proposals Swift had been screaming about for 10 years. Buy Irish goods, tax the rich landlords.
So he lists the sane ideas.
And dismiss. He's saying to the political class and the Irish people, you ignored my good ideas. You ignored the rational solutions. So fine, if you're going to act like animals, here's the only logical solution left. Eat your kids.
He's shouting at the victims as much as the oppressors.
He is. It's an expression of pure, unadulterated rage. It's not funny. It's a scream of despair masquerading as a spreadsheet.
We're coming to the final chapter of Swift's life now. And it's a sad one. He had a premonition about his own end, didn't he?
He did. A very famous one. He was walking with a friend once and pointed to an old tree that was dying from the top branches down. He said, I shall be like that tree. I shall die at the top.
Meaning he would lose his mind before he lost his body.
And that's exactly what happened. The Ménière's disease got worse. he likely developed dementia.
By 1738, the decline was clear. But in 1742, it turned into a horror story.
It did. He developed an inflammation in his left eye. The pain was so excruciating that the swelling was the size of a chicken egg. The sources say 5 attendants had to restrain him to stop him from tearing his own eye out.
My God, that's just awful to imagine.
He went a full year without speaking a single word. He was eventually declared of unsound mind and memory. The brilliant orator, the man whose words could move nations, was silent and trapped in his own pain.
But even in that state, he had one last joke, or perhaps one last act of charity planned. His will.
Swift left the bulk of his fortune, about £12,000, a huge sum to found a hospital. But not just any hospital. He founded St. Patrick's Hospital for Imbeciles.
Which is still there today, right?
Yeah.
As a psychiatric hospital.
It is. He even wrote a verse about it. He gave the little wealth he had to build a house for fools and mad, and showed by one satiric touch no nation wanted it so much.
Wow.
He was taking a shot at the Irish people one last time, calling them fools, but simultaneously giving everything he had to care for them. That's Swift in a nutshell.
He died in 1745. He was buried in St. Patrick's Cathedral right next to Stella. And he wrote his own epitaph. It's in Latin, but the translation is powerful.
Ubi seva indignatio ulterius cor lacerare nequit, where fierce indignation can no longer injure the heart.
Savage indignation. That is the phrase that defines him. He felt things so intensely it physically hurt him.
And the epitaph continues as a challenge. The poet Yeats translated it beautifully. Swift has sailed into his rest. Savage indignation there cannot lacerate his breast. Imitate him if you dare. World-besotted traveler, he served human liberty.
Imitate him if you dare. So let's wrap this up. What is the legacy of Jonathan Swift?
He is a man of contradictions, a Tory who became an Irish revolutionary, a clergyman who wrote what many called blasphemy, a misanthrope who hated mankind but loved individuals like Stella so deeply.
And his influence is everywhere. George Orwell admired him, even though he disagreed with his politics.
And in a strange way, he's the most popular Irish author globally by library holdings. More than Joyce, more than Wilde, because of Gulliver.
And here's a fun fact to close on. There's a crater on Deimos, one of the moons of Mars, named the Swift crater.
Why is that?
Because in Gulliver's Travels, he wrote about the astronomers of the flying island of Laputa, and he claimed they had discovered 2 moons of Mars. This was 150 years before the actual moons of Mars were discovered.
No way. He just guessed.
He just guessed correctly, or maybe he did some speculative math on planetary distances, but he predicted them. That is fitting. He saw things others couldn't see.
He really did.
So here's the final thought for you to chew on. Swift's epitaph challenges us to imitate him if you dare. In our modern world, which is just as full of information overload, political absurdity, and fake news as Swift's London, do we need more of his savage indignation? We often say we want civility, but Swift suggests that when the world is crazy, civility can be a form of complicity. He suggests we should be angry.
But we also have to ask, did that anger achieve his goals, or did it just eat him alive from the inside out?
It's a dangerous fuel.
It drives change, but it burns the engine.
Thanks for taking the deep dive.
Until next time.